The time is 9:55, 59 and we are in Hanover, and you are in, Martin?
Zeist, near
Zeist.
Utrecht. Yeah, Zeist.
Zeist, nearby Utrecht. Okay, welcome. Good morning, Martin.
Good morning, Volker.
This is webinar number 2 we are doing, and to show the listeners what Martin said at the end of webinar number 1, today should be something like finding the life's work, defining events, turning points, the losing of the bond, times of diversion from the general character of the major period, and a possible dichotomy or a breach inside a major period. That was at the end of webinar number 2. This is the homepage, the site on the internet. The address is delineation.vonabisw.de, and if you scroll below the blue picture, you find on the right-hand side Martin Hermes webinars, and here you find first the YouTube channel videos of Martin. We are at the moment at 399 interested people for the first webinar, and second, this is without the pictures of us. And this is on my YouTube channel with the pictures of Martin and me on the side. So whatever you prefer, you can watch these webinars either on the YouTube channel of Martin or myself. Here is the homepage of martinhermes.com. And here is the book about these webinars in German. It's called Die Lebenslinie im Horoskop. Erkennen Sie Ihre wichtigsten Lebensperioden und Ziele mit der klassischen Astrologie, for those who can read German. That's in Astronova Tübingen, published by Reinhard Stiele. So, and with that, I take down the desktop on my side and I give the host function to Martin. Host erstellen. You should be the host now, are you?
I am, yes. I can share the screen, so I will do that now. Mm-hmm.
And now everything is yours.
Thank you. Let's see if this works. Yep, it does. I need to put down these things, put them over there. Okay, well, welcome again for this second part of our demonstration of this fantastic material, Zodiacal releasing from spirit, or in my terminology, I call it Aphesis or Aphesis. I have changed the content of this second part somewhat due to something I studied and I needed to tell you before I move on to the other parts and the other things I've done. So I see wait a minute, sorry, I'm in the middle of my presentation. I need to go to this one, sorry. This is the one, yes. So I changed it a bit, the content of this second installment of this demonstration. The reason is because I started rereading Valence, and he has a very interesting example in his book 4, where he introduces this this method of zodiacal releasing. So I want to highlight some points that can be learned from his example. And I will treat also the first of the focus periods and turning points, which is a very important one, which is about finding the life's work, which is quite an interesting and very remarkable thing we are able to do with this method of zodiacal releasing. So let's have a look at the first one. So this is the example, the chart that Veget's Valence gives in his book 4 on page 15 in the translation of Robert Schmidt. So let's have a look first at his delineation of it, and then I will highlight some points to be noted with these interpretations and these delineations of what these periods actually showed in the life of this person. So here's the example of his chart in a bigger sense. this is what Valence says. I made the times pertaining to action, which is, of course, the function of the lot of the daimon. And it starts from Scorpio. And he gives 15 years to it based on the period of Mars, and 12 years for Sagittarius, because that's the period of this image and its ruler, Jupiter. So he counted them up, and until the 27th years, the time was irregular and he became a vagabond. Sounds very interesting. A livelihood that was adequate. So he had some money, I guess, but it was squandered by his trustees. So and why was this? Because Valence says the place of acquisition, which is the 11th from fortune, was in Gemini, and none of the benefics was regarding, but Cronus alone was opposed. So here we have the lot of acquisition, and we can see that Saturn is the only planet opposing the place of acquisition, and Jupiter is in aversion to it because it's 150 degrees divided from the place of acquisition. And Venus, the other benefic, is in a semi-sextile to this place. So that was the reason why this didn't quite work out, and the reason why his finances were depleted by his trustees. So the next period, Valence says Capricorn took over for 30 years, and I said that it is for 27 years. This is one of the differences between what Valence says, but later he indeed says that the Capricorn periods have to do with 27 years and not 30 years, and the period of the water pourer is 30 years. So that's the difference between two images ruled by the same planet, Kronos, Saturn. Okay, so what does he say about this? With Zeus being upon it and occupying the good spirit is the Hellenistic name for the 11th place, and being contemplated chronically, which is an opposition, by the Sun and Aphrodite, and it drew out the whole time lordship in a propitious manner. So the great difference now is that the previous periods were quite difficult, and now all of a sudden they look up, they are become better simply because Jupiter is there. Jupiter, even being in its image of its fall, doesn't matter. A benefic there makes the period better. That's interesting to know. So this is what happened. Things turned up quite a bit, but Valence says, but enduring at times impediments and irregularities in accordance with the taking over or witnessing of malefics, which is of course referring to the L2 periods, the minor periods under the Capricorn, goat horned one period. And an acquisition that did not last. And the interesting remark is that the reason is because Jupiter is retrograde. And Schmidt concluded that it's always the case that when benefics deliver their goods, they do so even when retrograde, but then they will also take them back. So this is an interesting example of this. When malefics are retrograde, one of the possible meanings is that they deny entirely anything associated with a particular place. So that's interesting. So that's his first example. He goes on. Then after Capricorn, when Aquarius takes over the times, with Aries, which is Mars, testifying, and Hermes testifying via an opposition, and the benefics being in aversion, Jupiter, Venus, and the sextile, he ceased his activities and lost much by innocent trust. So he fell into debt, scarcity, and because of lack of care, he was found abject since the general support had his bearing. With the general support, I mean, this refers to the triplicity rulers and the fortune houses, but I'm leaving this aside as did Valence. He didn't mention them except for the place of acquisition, the 11th place from fortune. Okay, so then he goes on to say how the next periods are divided under the L2 periods, under this water pourer period of the 12th place. So Aquarius itself took 2 years and 6 months, which is the L2 subperiods. Then follows Zeus because of the fishes, then Ares because of the ram, and then you get actually this, as is shown in the software Planet Dance, when you have a major period of the water pora Aquarius, then you see these orders following as the L2 periods, which is exactly what Valence says here. So you see Aphrodite 8 months. I'm highlighting this one because Valence says that at the time of the twins again, the 11th place of fortune, which is the acquisitions. At that time, his affairs were on the wane. And the reason is that Mercury, the ruler of this period, this L2 period, is in opposition with the image of the major period, Aquarius, the water power. And of course, Mercury is in a weak place, as is the lot of fortune, which is with Mercury Hermes. Next, Selenate takes over, which is, of course, the place where the sun and both Venus resides. In these times, it seemed that someone had the trust paid, and he met with help of friends, which is an interesting one because that's one of the significations of the 5th place as well. And also you could see Saturn, the ruler of this period, is ruler of the 11th place as well, and it's in superior position with the moon, which is the L2 period ruler. So you see here some of the examples of how Valence delineates the effects of the planets when they become the rulers of time. That's interesting. So we move on to the other ones. Again, when Hermes comes to the fore, when the Virgin is having the period, the L2 period, the minor period, for 1 year and 8 months, malefics are testifying to Hermes, and he was brought down during these times. Again, Mercury itself, Hermes, is in the 6th place of a sort of downfall, one of the weakest places. So you can see here how things work out. And again, these are the next periods, and in the Sagittarius period, the end came about, which probably means that the person died. So, which is again an interesting signification of Saturn, but let's leave it at that. So, okay. Now, this is what Valence says in book 4 about this example. So let's see if we can learn something for what can be learned from it. Well, let's first look at the place of acquisition, which is the fortune's 11th place. So here we have it. This is what Valence said. The time was irregular. He became a vagabond, mainly because Saturn was in opposition. Now, the first thing that we can learn from this is that this delineation by Valence is completely based on the location of planets in a particular sign image, which is the major period indicator for the zodiacal releasing period. So we start with the Scorpio, which has Mars in it, and then we move to Sagittarius, where we find the Bowman is what it's called in Hellenistic astrology, where we find Saturn, and both periods together were quite difficult for the person. So the interesting thing is that no mention is made of the dispositor of the L1 image by Valence. So he doesn't speak about Mars ruling the first 15 years. He doesn't speak about Jupiter ruling the next 12 years, but he only refers it to the planets located in these images. But that doesn't mean that we must ignore these things simply because Schmidt said that it is the Lord of the perfection, which is the images that follow one another in this scenario, who takes action in response to the impulses supplied by the other planets via configuration. So you can say that, and I will show examples of this further on in next presentations, but the image, the ruler, the domicile ruler of the image that has the period is a very important one to take into consideration, as I will show in this example as well. Okay, next lesson learned. The planets in images is what I said. but I'm actually referring to the place of acquisition. So it's pretty sure obvious that the main financial position of this person was quite challenged, with the place of acquisition being so maltreated by, in this case, Saturn. So and being in aversion with the benefics. So that's quite a difficult position. But the interesting thing is that you can say that Valence introduces certain significations of fortune houses in trying to understand what's going on in the life of a person. And in this case, of course, happiness was very often associated with having enough money, being wealthy, etc. So you could have a good position in life. This is, of course, somewhat different nowadays, but we still have persons who are very poor, and we have also have persons who are exceedingly rich, and the place of acquisition can have something to do with that. So this is the reason why this factor was introduced by Valence. And it's interesting that the opposition, again, of a malefic really hurts the significations of, in this case, the acquisition, the gathering of wealth and money. So that's an important one to understand and to keep in mind. The place of acquisition can be used for trying to understand what's happening in the life of the native. Perhaps not as dramatically as in those days, but again, we still hear stories of people who go from rags to riches, and the opposite, from riches to rags. So something might be going on with the place of acquisition in these charts. So, okay. Okay, one of the most important lessons for me was, and this is directed at people who are modern astrologers, which we all are, of course, but some people are psychological astrologers, evolutionary astrologers, and there's a sort of a conceptualization going on there that is a bit sort of challenged by these delineations as presented by Valence, because what you see is that although the sign of acquisition is rather lousy in this chart for this man, the problems apparently played out especially at the time of the activation of the first two major periods, and of course also the third one. But this leads to a very important conclusion, that the chart factors in traditional astrology have to do with promises. And as I perhaps said before, the native psyche or your character is but one topic within your life. So you need to understand that in traditional astrology, the chart is not a chart of your psyche, but it's a chart of your life. So stuff happening in your life, and it's all divided up in certain areas of life, and your personality is but one of the topics in these delineations and in this chart of which has to do with your life. So it's not about your psyche alone, but it's simply about everything that's going on in your life. So this is more, let's say, it's a more objective evaluation of what's going on in your life, and not a subjective one or a personal one, even though everything that happens to you is, of course, very personal. But when the natal chart factors imply promises, they only play out, as you can see with this system, at the times that the promise becomes operative or is activated. So not everything happens at all the time, or is going on all the time in your life. No, there are certain episodes in your life in which certain factors play out more prominently than others, and you have to deal with them at the time that is given to them. Oh. So the affliction of the acquisition changes and is alleviated at the moment that the major period goes to Capricorn, where we find the benefic Jupiter. That's an interesting fact, because then the financial troubles are alleviated somehow. So something changes in the financial situation of this person. And the interesting thing is that this manifests in this life, even though Jupiter is not the benefic of the favorite sect, and even though Saturn remains the ruler of the whole period belonging to Capricorn, and he still opposes the acquisition. So here you can see that Jupiter really alleviates the pain caused by Saturn being in opposition with acquisition. So that's interesting. And again, something to be learned and to taken into account is that opposition with benefics, here it's Venus and the Sun, is quite good for any period. So be it an L1 period, a major period, or a minor period under a major period. So that's interesting. So if one had said on the basis of the conditions of the place of acquisition that this man would have had problems all his life in acquiring and keeping onto possessions and money, one would have missed the point. So that's to me, this was a very important lesson to understand that things in life do not happen all the time. All these planets in your chart are not operative all the time in your life. So that's a very important thing to understand with these methods. That's to me, this was a revelation. Okay, so this is an important astrological phenomenon and raises questions about the permanence of natal indications. Can we actually make general valid statements or long-term statements based on natal conditions alone without involving a timing system like this? So, because a timing system will indicate when a certain factor will become manifest or subside, like the case here with the difficult financial position of this man, which subsided when Jupiter became the planet in the image that ruled the major period. That's interesting. So perhaps a somewhat strict consideration is that the natal promise is nothing more than that. It's a promise which only becomes manifest at the times when the times say that it's the turn for this factor to present itself or to come on the scene in the life of the native. So, this has to do with fate concepts. When is something due in your life? When will it manifest? And when will you have to take action to deal with these situations? And you can see in the descriptions that Valens uses that he's very strict about what happens then. And he also associates it each time with what happens in the sub-periods and what happens to the indications of Jupiter going up and down with the minor periods that I've shown before. So when the period arrives in the image of Hermes, problems happen because this image where Hermes is, it's the sixth place, but it's also in opposition with the place of the water pourer. So that's interesting. So you can say that the natal chart with these methods shows something like clockwork, which is zodiacal releasing, which indicates when something is due, or in the metaphor, what time it is in your life. What time is it today? Oh, today it's Saturn time. Today is Jupiter time, something like that. So in this whole Capricorn period, the goat horn one, all things are looking up due to Jupiter in Capricorn, by Saturn being in aversion with Capricorn, and the Lord of the exaltation, Mars, is dignified in domicile, the Scorpion. Now, an interesting thing is that when I change the word potential here, the word promise to potential instead of promise, it again suggests some sort of individuation principle, which few other astrological methods, as far as I know, track so methodically. So here you have sort of, again, what reminds me of Jung's individuation principle, which might be tracked with this method. So that's very interesting to keep in mind. Not everything is going on at the same time in your life. There are periods, there are chapters in your life, and you have to deal with certain things at a certain time and not all the time in your life. Not everything is happening at the same time, all the time. That's the most important lesson from this. Okay. So another thing I discovered by means of this method is what I call planetary transformations. I will demonstrate this, what this is. Again, I take this example because the change, the shift from Capricorn to Aquarius, from the goat-horned one to the water pourer, is a very interesting one, and suggested to me this idea of planetary transformation. Now, we see that this water pourer period is quite bad for this person by reason of these significations, but there's also something else going on. It's a less fortunate period. That's really not an issue here. It is a very difficult period. So the bad times return because Saturn no longer being in aversion with the water pourer, as it was with in the Capricorn period. So there's a shift because Saturn in the Capricorn period was actually out of the picture because of the aversions, because of being in semi-sextile with its own image, the Capricorn. And it also introduces this interesting idea because the planetary transformations happens to Saturn. And the reason is that Saturn now changes the place that it rules. And that's a very, very big difference in this case. So it's as follows: the action of two images under the rule of one and the same planet. So we're talking about Saturn in this case, because the new image, the difficult period of the Aquarius, is the evil spirit, which is the 12th place. And it functions differently in this period because it no longer represents the 11th place of the Capricorn, but now it represents the 12th place. So you could say that the character of Saturn now changes in the most dramatic way because he is very strong because he's in the 10th place, but he now represents something completely different as compared with the 11th place. So we can say, in addition, that the Capricorn period had the effect of Jupiter, which is fully engaged in Capricorn because Jupiter is in Capricorn, and the main period is dominated by it, as Valens shows with his delineation in this example. Also, Venus contributed her positive part by having a configuration, an opposition. It's from an opposition, but it's also fortunate because it's a benefic. Now, all these advantages are lost when the Aquarius becomes the major period, being the 12th image, but neither Jupiter nor Venus can contribute their beneficence because of their aversion to Aquarius. And it's also the case for Saturn, the ruler of this period, also in aversion with both Jupiter and Venus. So the benefics turn away from both Aquarius and Saturn, which is very bad news in this case. So that's what I call a planetary transformation. The nature, the character, not its nature changes, but the character changes because Saturn represents something else now, because it's now in this period the ruler of the 12th place, which is quite a different signification when compared to the 11th place. So that's another lesson learned. So this is it. Well, you can read about it. I've explained it enough, I think. Planetary transformation can happen with any planets ruling two images, where one place that it rules is a benefic place and the other one is a malefic place. And when these images are activated in zodiacal releasing, then you will see a very dramatic change in the nature of the planet. So suppose it's Aries ruling the ram or the scorpion, then you can see quite a difference in both these places when one of them is the 8th place or the 6th place or the 12th place as compared to the other one, which is then perhaps a more benefic place. So keep this in mind. You can see the shift of images like in this manner in the major period or in the minor period, the L2 periods, then you can see such a planetary transformation. It goes from good to bad or the other way around. Keep that in mind. And Valence confirms this again, how this event finally worked out for this person. Lack of money, lack of care, which is typical for Saturn. The way Saturn handles things is by ignoring them, not taking care of them, not paying attention, etc. That has to do with the planet being the ruler of a certain image. That is the style in which the native handles all the things happening to him or her in this period. So keep that in mind. That's an interesting upgrade for the dispositor, the domicile ruler of the image that has the times in this method. So again, we see here that any planet that is a domicile ruler of 2 images, one of them makes it the ruler of a benefic place and the other one of a malefic place. I told this. And what is very interesting for this method of zodiacal releasing is that these things can only be seen with a method like this, like zodiacal releasing, different chronocrates and period systems, which divide the life into certain periods where one planet is highlighted and the other one is not. So that's interesting to know. And there's also a similar phenomenon, which I call aspect transformation. I will explain this. It's not happening in this chart, but I want to show you how this functions, because it has to do with the change of periods, be it in a major period or a minor period. So aspect transformations. Now, this is a fictitious example. So suppose that Aries and Aphrodite, Mars and Venus are conjunct. And we can then say that one of them is maltreated by Mars and the other one is bona fide by Venus. So this has a huge effect on the major L1 and minor L2 periods when these images are ruled by either Aries, Mars, or Aphrodite, Venus. And for instance, when the period moves from Aries to the bull, from the ram to the bull, then you could say that a helpful and perhaps fortuitous period, because Mars being bona fide by Venus, transforms into a difficult and troublesome one, because now we move to the bull, which is under the rule of Venus, Aphrodite, and Aphrodite is maltreated by being in conjunction with Mars. So the aspect of configuration turns into its opposite effect. Something benefic, in a certain sense, turns into something malefic. A strong period or a good period can transform into a more difficult period, simply because the nature of the aspect changes, because one planet is now the new ruler, which is either the bona fide ruler or perhaps the maltreated ruler. Here you see the opposite effect when it moves from a Libra scales period to the Scorpion period, be it in a major or a minor period. You see it the other way around, because now we have a maltreated Venus period of the scales, Libra, changed into a bona fide Mars period under Scorpio. Again, the aspect of configuration turns into its opposite effect, which is a very interesting phenomenon to observe. And again, this can only be seen again with a periodic system which uses chronocrates like we do in zodiacal releasing, as I have shown in these lessons. Okay, So keep these in mind. These are very interesting things to observe, and I think you can find them in your own chart. I used the example of a conjunction, a configuration, but it can be anyone. It can be an opposition, it can be a square, which is of course more difficult, but it can also be beneficial aspects, being the sextile configuration. Do not think that this is about aspects alone. It's about configurations as well. So they have no orb in a sense. So look at them, look at the planet's opposite square, and there you have also a possible aspect transformation during a certain period. So keep that in mind. Okay, now hopefully these lessons will take effect, and it's interesting to keep them in mind. So now I will turn to, for part 2b in this demonstration, to one of the more important focus periods and turning points, which is finding the life's work. I will demonstrate it with the chart of Volker, and my own chart will also be used for illustration of this. So the life's work, which is a very important thing to observe and very interesting as well. It's a very powerful tool in this zodiacal releasing method. So here we have the chart of Volker again, and here we have the first period. And let me first say something about these focus periods and turning points. They were introduced by Schmidt, and he marked out 4 special phenomena which have to do with planets being activated or images being activated in the sub-periods under a major period, which is here the Hermes Virgo period. And one of them, of course, then is finding the life's work, but there are more of them. And these turning points all have to do with the arrival of a main level 1 period or a level 2 period in special images or certain important planets. They have this effect on all levels, and it's interesting to keep a track of them. I will introduce the next ones in the next presentation, but now I will focus on finding the life's work because things can be learned from it. So the appearance of them in the main periods of L1 and L2 periods are more profound than in the underlying levels, but that's a given, I think. Schmidt gave them each a title that more or less expresses what's going on, what happens when these periods are activated. And I have partly copied these names and these concepts, sometimes characterize them somewhat differently. But the first one, finding the life's work, is from the copyright is with Robert Schmidt, so to speak. So when is there a period of finding the or a or one's life's work? And that's quite simple. We note the encounter with the domicile ruler of the lot of spirit in a major or minor period. So let's look at the one in Volker's chart. The domicile ruler of Volker's lot of spirit is which is in the Virgin, that's Hermes. So here we find, here Volker had his first encounter with what we now call finding a life's work. Yeah. So it's of course interesting that Volker was only 4 years of age. So could you call it a calling? That's quite difficult, but of course we know that as a child, we often had very special interests. So perhaps it's not right to call this a life's work, but it could be that was very inspiring for a young boy like Volker when he was only 4 years of age, something that fascinated you or something that was of high interest for you.
I have to pass on that. I have no recollection what happened when I was 4. The only thing I remember when we moved to Stuttgart was this car experience, riding on a car. And I remember that when I was 6, I was on a Leipzig fair with my father, who was exhibiting the Dampfwalzen, the rollers for road construction. But in the age of 4, no recollection. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, that's no problem, because luckily there are more of these periods, because here they are. So when you were 22, one happened. Please note that the periods are quite long, so you cannot say, well, at that exact date or that exact moment, I had a realization of things I wanted to do. So please.
Yeah, this 72 is very important, because in summer, this is July to 72. In summer, I drove my car with a companion, and we had a very bad accident. I was in the hospital for 8 weeks, and I had this English. I had a luxation of the hip, and I was in this stretching procedure for 8 weeks, and with additional following up physiotherapy. And that happened in 72, and I lost 1 semester of my studies.
Okay. Well, that's a life's work, right?
And that sounds a lot like Capricorn, doesn't it?
Yeah, okay. I will get back to the issue of finding your life's work, because this is a good example of a person that had quite a traumatic experience when this period arrived. So, and that leads to a certain interpretation of what a life work actually is. So I will get back to that issue in a few slides. Do you remember anything about the other ones when you were 29?
In 1979, my final exam, which is in American terms the bar examination, in Germany it's die zweite juristische Staatsprüfung, which gives you all the qualifications for the legal professions in Germany, and that happened on the 20th of September. And I became a civil servant on the 24th of September in 1979.
Okay. And
from then on, I remained in the public service.
Okay, and could you call that a calling? Is this?
Yes, certainly, because then you start becoming a servant of the public. And the interesting thing is, I was a member of a party in those days, and I had a sort of idealistic approach, and I left the Conservative Party to be a real public servant, to be independent. Which in retrospect was not so intelligent an idea, because if I had stayed in the Conservative Party, my career would have gone 3 levels higher probably. But I'm okay with that. And in the same period, something started. You remember my biography. Sort of in that time, I became a member of a Rosicrucian order, and I remained with that Rosicrucian order till 2000. It's Lectorium Rosicrucianum, a Dutch-based organization. Okay,
that's interesting as well, because in one of the next slides, I will again address what actually is the life's work, what it's about.
Yeah. And the next one would be April 1993. That's interesting, because I had some quarrels with my superiors, and they didn't want to promote me, but because I was handicapped of this car accident. So it goes back to the car accident in 1972. And now in 1993, because this handicap, you have a special status in Germany if you're handicapped, if you're more than 50% handicapped. And so there's an organization in Germany for the handicapped people. Each employer has to have a special mentor for the handicapped, and he organized that. I got promoted against the resistance of my superiors, and I became Minister of Art in more or less in that period in 1903.
Okay, interesting.
And the same thing is then in 2004. Because in 2004 in Lower Saxony, where I was with the Ministry of Economics, there was a sort of not a revolution, a reformation of the organization of the public service in Lower Saxony, and they abolished a middle stage of administration people. It's called Bezirksregierung in German. And because of that, abolishing this organization on the middle level, they suddenly had too many people, and there was no work for them. So they asked many people to leave the public service if possible. And I raised my hand and said, I want to leave, I want to retire with a reduced pension. And that took about from February to August, and in September I somewhat got the information that I can leave on the 31st of September.
Okay.
So that would be again complying with that chart.
Yeah, right. Thanks for the explanation. Okay, so let's have a look at how this can function. If this perfection itself is angular succeedance, which is the case here, it can be a notable time for the native. When we are talking about the location of planets in whole sign houses, which can be angular succeedent or in decline, we are talking about the strength of an impact that a certain planet of a period can have. So when there's no planets in the image, which has to do with finding the life's work, then we need to take into account the place where it's located. So here it's in the succeedent place, which is strong. It's not as strong as when it's angular, but nevertheless, it's a strong place to have this planet in. So that has a certain impact. So that's important. So you can do these things. You can say that these periods, peak times, are especially dramatic when the minor perfection is the fortune 10th or the fortune's first house. Again, here we have the fortune houses, which can pack a lot of punch. Mercury is not in those places, but it's in the fortune 11th. So that's very interesting to see. That's also a very good place. For instance, there's also some trouble here. So you can hear that what happened to Volker in those periods was not exactly a very happy period, or because the first one, he doesn't have a recollection, but the second one was quite a severe accident, car accident. So here you can see that it's Mercury is in aversion with the benefics, Jupiter and Venus, and also with the Sun, but it's in trigonal configuration with the sect-light, which is good, and both malefics, which is less good. So,
well, this is very good what you just said, because people passing by the accident place said nobody has survived this, and then they found me back in the hospital.
Okay, so that's the the good configuration with the sect-light, which is something that rescues you. But
yes.
Also, of course, the sun in the first place is a very vital planet. So that gives a lot of backbone, I think, not only mentally, but also physically. So that's very good. And again, we see Mercury is in the fortune 11th, which has to do with acquisition, which is money-wise, but also accomplishment and achievement. So that's an interesting to note. Okay, now let's have a look at my chart. In my chart, and my life's work really was very strongly related, finding life's work, to my vocation and later profession. Let me explain this. Let me show this. The first time I met my ruler of my lot of the diamond was in 1974, and just before that I asked a guitar for my birthday, and I got one. And pretty soon after that, I developed a very strong ambition to become a musician. So I played in bands, and I wanted really to be a rock star, and well, all of that things. So that drive was very strong in that period. My Saturn is in the 7th place, so that's a very strong place as well. That's very interesting. So that really was sort of finding a life's work, in the sense that it really motivated me to become a musician, which is a profession, of course. Now, the second one was shortly after the second period that I had this finding life work event, was in March 1983, when I really had a life-changing revelation, which prompted me to, within a week, which is quite soon, quit my training as a history teacher. And I wanted to devote myself to what was then called the alternative sector, which was the fledgling New Age and all that, which was really coming on the scene quite strongly. And I was very intrigued by all that because of this revelation type event. And soon after that, I think around May 1983, I started studying astrology, and my first official course was in September 1983. And so I started studying and practicing astrology, and I still do that. So in my life, this really had to do very much with my with finding a life's work, with an inspiration that prompted me to follow a certain path in life. So when I started studying this method, I thought, yeah, I can do this in public. I can ask a person for his or her chart and find out when they had this period of finding the life's work. So you have to simply find it, print out this scenario, and you say to the person, well, what did you develop in that period? What happened to you, and what had this event to do with finding a life's work? So ta-da, there you have it. You scored big time. So that was easy, right? Well, it wasn't quite as straightforward as that. And the interesting thing is that I didn't know what Volker just told us about all the periods that he mentioned, but he actually illustrated how they function, and I will show you how I came to this realization, simply because it turned out that clients often had different experiences when this period was due. So in my life, the first period of my life, the first 30 years, it indeed had to do with something professional. But as Volker just said, the second period was actually the period of a very heavy traffic accident. So as I said here, clients often related rather intense and sometimes even traumatic events during these periods, irrespective of their later work or profession. So one of these explanations for this, to me, I think can be found in the other significations of the lot of the daimon, because Veges Valens and other Hellenistic astrologers suggest that there are three major topics which have to do with the lot of the daimon, which are these: career and occupation, action, which is the word for it, spirituality and religion. Some the author even called this the lot of God, the lot of the spirit. Spirituality and religion has to do with it, and it can also have to do with the native psyche, simply because the impact of this period can have a strong influence on your personality as well. As you can understand, when you have a very serious accident or something and you get handicapped, then this does something with your psyche as well. So that's interesting to understand. So there are different ways to interpret the idea of what is a life's work. So again, the first one, in the context of profession and career, it indeed can have something to do with finding a vocation in the sense of action, in the sense, yeah, that's what I want to do. That's what I'm going to do, like it was in my life. In the context of spirituality and religion, finding the life's work or a life's work probably means some kind of enlightenment or a spiritual or religious awakening, which is also a very important one. I couldn't find the example again, but I studied this. I found this also in the chart of Rudolf Steiner, the person who developed the anthroposophy. I believe it's called different in the English language, but and the interesting thing is that, again, he found indeed a very inspiring and religious person coming into his life at the time of the activation of this finding the life's work, which had a profound influence on him.
That's the same thing with me, because considering the importance, the public service sort of was important, but much more, really much more important was me becoming a member of the Rosicrucian Order, Lectorium Rosicrucianum.
Right.
And
right.
The vocation was for that order. And one reason why I wanted to go into public service was that the Lectorium Rosicrucianum is organized in a way that many free time you have to be available. And if I would have gone into the normal economical sphere with all this stress and I could have become a banker because of my banking background, but then I would have been traveling over the world, you know, and that would have not been compatible with the vocation for this Rosicrucian activity. And so the combination public service and lectorium, and the lectorium was first.
Okay, so there is a combination, there is an influence of both these effects on your profession.
Yes.
And it was inspired by a religious or a spiritual realization,
Yes.
which is very interesting. Yeah. Well, in the context of the native psyche, finding your life's work might also mean something of a very important insight or a self-realization, sort of an individuation moment, to put it in Jung's terms. But that might even be something traumatic. So it can refer to an event or development that marks an important stage in your personal psychological life and development. So keep that in mind. It might be any of these three. So if we look at these are the periods that Volker talked about. This is what I read in your
yes, before the lectorium, I became during my student time. I started with being a member of AMOG, Antiguus Mysticus Order Rosicrucis, up to the first temple degree, and later I changed to the lectorium.
Right, great. Now in my life, the second one, the realization of wanting to do something with in the long-term astrology, this event in itself was quite strong spiritually, because it's I always said a bit dramatically that I saw the light in that period, and that realization, that's something that people often say when they have sort of a spiritual revelation or an epiphany, then they often say, I have seen the light, which is something that happened to me as well, which is quite surprising, because the ruler of my daimon is Saturn, and seeing the light is not a natural signification of the dark Saturn Chronos. So that's interesting. It doesn't matter what planet it is. It's a phenomenon that has to do with finding your life's work, and it doesn't matter actually what kind of planet it is. Seeing the light is not a natural signification of Saturn, but I forgot what I wanted to say. But of course, the thing I started to do, trying to learn to play the guitar, was very hard and difficult. I chose the guitar because it looked so easy on television, but it wasn't. It's a very difficult instrument to try to learn to play, and I'm still doing it, and I'm still learning it. But I'm happy with doing it. And astrology, of course, is also quite a challenging a task to perform. When you study astrology, you can be years about it, doing it, trying to master it. So that has something to do with Saturn, I think. I have a tendency to choose quite difficult or not easy tasks for myself, but okay, it's what it is, right? So what presents itself as a life's work is also something you need to make work of in your life. So here we again have a sort of a fate word. It compels you to address these issues in your life. So when I can again use the example of Volker, when you have an accident like that, you cannot do something else but deal with the fact that you have a problem now with one of your legs, right? So you must make work of it. You cannot avoid it. And that's also something to do with the strong fate concepts being at work in these methods, which is, to me, very astonishing and very powerful tool of this zodiacal releasing method.
I have to correct you in one aspect. When I was released from the hospital in 1972, the handicap situation didn't manifest itself right away. Basically, the handicap situation manifested itself in 1986. Till then, I still could. I could even dance on a sport level. I was a sports dancer in Germany, classic and Latin, and I could do this till 1985 something, or like 1982. But in 1986, I was in holidays on Speakerhoek with homeopathic backgrounds, and I was riding on a horseback, and there was a change in my hip, and then that was a post-traumatic event years later.
Okay. Interesting. The reason why it's interesting, I've put up the scenario of your life, Volker, again. I'm not sure if people can see this pointer. Yeah, I'm going to use this. You say that it started in this period, right?
86.
86.
Yeah.
In the holidays, in the last phase of
It
this
was
Aries.
in, no, it's not, it really was in, yes, it was in Aries, yes.
Okay.
It was
Well,
in
the
Aries.
interesting thing is this is under the Scorpio period, and it's activated at the moment that the other image of Scorpio, of Aries, because the ruler of both the Scorpion and the Ram is Aries, Mars. So what we see now is an activation of something which has a martial nature, an Aries nature, Mars, being activated in the last phase of this Aries period, which is an activation of Mars as well. So in the Mars period, this is one of these turning points which I will refer to later on in the next presentation, because I believe Schmidt called this a turning point. And in this case, we can truly say that this was a turning point for you.
Yes.
So,
and from then on, I belong to the handicapped employee group
Right.
in the ministry.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. Okay. Let's see the next one. So my realization by this experience, and also interestingly enough, what Volker mentioned, what happened to him in these periods, is the question about what a life's work actually is. So I think that with this differentiation, we can make a better prognosis what this specific turning point will indicate. It will always be something important, something perhaps eventful, which is also dependent on the location of the image in which the ruler of the daimon is, be it angular, succedent, or cadent. The strongest one, the most impactful one, will be when the ruler is in an angular house, as is the case in my chart. Second best is in a succedent house, and less good or less visible perhaps is when the ruler of the daimon is in a cadent place. So check this out for your own chart, and the easiest way to do that is with planet dance.
I have an additional information. I just checked these dates. There is an L2 in Gemini beginning at 28th of 4th of 1987. And the period ends at December 1988. And in 1988, in the summertime, there was this international world conference, Geist und Natur, Spirit and Mind, organized by the governor of Lower Saxony. Quite interesting feature that the governor was interested in that. People from all over the world came, Capra and even Charles Popper came to this conference. And there was a whole week, and it was very, very important for me personally. And that is on the L2 in 28/4/1987, and it happened in 1988 in the summer.
Okay, so that's this period again. That's interesting because now it's not Mercury itself activated by being in this image, but it's of course the other image of Hermes, Mercury, which is the ruler of the daimon for Volker. So thank you again for that information. So we now see, these are things that I didn't check, and it's interesting to see it come to life in this example and the things Volker says about them and the events happening in his life at these periods, which have a very strong impact. So I think this clearly shows the importance of this method, because we can see very important things happening. And I must say, I started doing this method because there was a very young astrologer in America who said to me that he was only 20 years old. So I thought, well, what can he know, right? And he simply said, you have found your life's work in the periods that I just showed you, the periods when I got my guitar and the period that I started doing astrology. And I really was blown away with how is it possible that such a young astrologer can so quickly identify these periods? Now, this is the reason why.
Yes,
He
and the
said that.
interesting thing is, one of these younger astrologers is Chris Brennan, and in his long video about zodiacal releasing, he talks about the philosophy crisis, because he followed the full philosophy of free will and not determination. And because of this method, you get into a philosophy crisis if you take it seriously.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
basically, we are talking about a natal chart.
Right.
And everything is in the natal chart. And
Right.
if you're talking about Harmony or Providence or Pronoia, we are talking about where are the bounds and borders for free will.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I had sort of the same crisis as well when fate struck me in my life, which had to do with my firstborn daughter who had a slight handicap, which was not visible but turned out in her life. And I told in another interview with Kat Rose Nelligan that was for me the turning point, simply because I lost faith in psychological astrology simply because I could not see in my modern chart how this was possible in my life. And again, the idea, why should my daughter have to suffer for something that is going on in my life? So that was another one. Another realization, and I really was at the point of turning down astrology wholesale simply because I could no longer trust my instrument, because it didn't warn me, and none of my colleagues had warned me that this might be a possibility. And we can have a long discussion about the idea, would you have wanted to know this beforehand, that there might be something wrong with your firstborn? I'm not sure about that, but the fact that it was not seen really led to a sort of post-traumatic stress syndrome in my life, simply because it really turned me completely upside down. I lost faith in astrology, and luckily for me, I had already subscribed to Project Hindsight, where this other sort of astrology came on the scene. So it was very important, and I had sort of a same difficult period in my life where I needed to change from being a psychological, happy-go-lucky astrologer. Everything is fine. Everything has a reason, a rhyme and reason to it. And then I had to turn back to, well, yeah, but not everybody gets what's expected. Life is not always a good place to be. Well, there is a saying in Dutch, and I'm not sure if I can translate it easily, but it's something like, not all the cups in your life will be filled to the brim. Not everything that which is promised or what is possible in your life will manifest itself. And the interesting thing is that you can see it with a scheme like this. So yeah, that's very important. And I think the reason for the opposition to this sort of astrology is sometimes quite how you say, polemic. It's sort of a war of visions between you are a fatalist and you are a dreamer when you are in one of these schools. I think this what happens when you use a system like this, a method like this, this changes, and this actually has to do with something challenged in your own life. Is everything really possible in your life? No, we all of us have encountered difficulties. Nothing is going as smooth as we would like to, and there's a great difference between my neighbor who has this and that and such, and I don't, or the other way around. So, and what explains this? The natal chart explains this, and it's shown by a method like this one. So.
Basically, we are touching on a problem. Most people discuss fate and free will on the basis of literature of Thomas von Aquin and later. And very few people go backwards into the old antique literature 200 years before Christ. And if you study Harmony, Pronoia, and Providence in the old days before Christ, you will realize that the philosophy problem is not as a big problem like Chris Brennan had it, because Chris Brennan was referring to Harmony in the sense of the 2nd century Anno Domini. And they are the people who have problem with fate and determination and free will. it's useful to go into the old literature because it's a better philosophy because it's determined and that's it, and the planets are the servants of harmony. No, it's not that. It's all godly inspired, and its thema anima mundi theme is much more difficult to understand if you only go by the authors of the 12th century and beyond. You have to go really back into the Stoic philosophy, literature, and Chrysippus especially, and you have to go into the research done today by a modern philosophy professor, a lady from Yale. I just read recently, and I have it on I can show the literature at the end of the webinar.
Okay. Yeah, there is an interesting book by a Dutch philosopher who talked about fate, and he had a very interesting idea about the different periods in history and how people dealt with things that could not be altered. So fate in the worst sense. So not fatalism, but fate as being something simply happening and you can't do anything about it. And he noted 4 periods, and he said, well, in the Greek period, the real hero of the day was the hero, which is the person that simply accepts his fate, can't do anything about it, and still does what he wants to do or needs to do. And in the Christian period, the hero of that day was the martyr, the people who got themselves killed for their beliefs. And also they underwent the fate principle simply because they were a given from God. And who are we to discuss with God, right, about what happens to us? We need to accept it. We cannot alter what he wants for us. His principle or his guidance is all important. So the martyr is actually the hero of that period. And then we come to the latter period with the industrialization, which is quite late in history. But the thing is that we were starting to work with or work against nature. The hero of that day is actually the person who does research and changes what nature does at the moment. So think of a vaccine. We have a problem now, COVID, and we are developing vaccines to battle something which nature has produced, which can be very dangerous for us. So that's the period of the Industrial Revolution. And what now is going on is a sort of back to nature, which is a very strong movement at the moment, which has to do, we have to see that everything we did to nature, all the economical problems, all the ecological problems have to do with being too interfering with nature. And what we have to do now is return things and let nature have its own way. So that's interesting to see that. You can also see that in our government, which has to do a lot with privatization. I'm not sure, is that the right word? So the functions normally under the rule of the government are now left over to the market, the free market. So what you see now is sort of a struggle of the fittest, providing for certain needs. And that's a very interesting take on how we deal with things that cannot be changed normally, and how we have changed our way of living with respect to fate, something that is forcing you to do something in a way that's perhaps not always chosen or not always naturally.
So let's get back to the webinar. Otherwise, our viewers will be, if they're not interested in this philosophy problem, they might not be content with that.
Okay, thanks. Well, this was actually the last slide on my presentation.
Oh, okay.
So these are the things that we need to look at. And well, I hope to see our viewers next time again, when I will be talking about the losing of the bonds, which is a very, I think next in importance to finding the life's work is the losing of the bond in this scenario. So these are times of diversion from the general character of the major period, and possibly a dichotomy or a breach inside a major period. So I hope we will see our viewers again next time.
And as always, Martin is reachable by telephone. Here's the telephone number. And the languages he is doing consultation is English, Dutch, and German. Now, you should give me back my hosting position.
Escape. There we are. Now I need to go to Zoom. Yeah. Oh, here we are. Now we need to. Participants too.
We might have to stop the sharing of the screen, I suppose.
I think so. More.
Yeah, more is good. And then
There you are. I think you're now the host, right?
Okay, and okay. You should turn off your screen, probably, because
screen sharing is paused.
I'm the host. Okay, I should be able to do something, but I can't put up my screen because you are still.
Oh, that's strange.
Okay, yeah. Oh, okay.
Is it
now we are on my
okay.
The literature I was talking about is Heimarmeni, Pronoia, and Providence is on this side. It's a subset of the same side, and it's the Yale professor is Nicolas Densey-Lewis, Cosmology and Fate in Gnosticism and Greco-Roman Antiquity under pitiless skies. It's a research product from Nakamadi and Manichaean Studies. And there is another book I want to show you, which goes into that field if you're interested to go more into that, which I just recently loaned. Okay, and the title, I will get this tomorrow. Fate, Providence, and Moral Responsibility in Ancient, Medieval, and something more. So let's check this out in ancient, how to find this. Okay. We go out there. And I could borrow this. Oh, that's wrong. Sorry. Well, okay, let's leave it at that. And to come to a closing of this wonderful webinar, as mentioned, the copyright is as follows. I have the right to publish everything uncut and unedited, and Martin has the right to do whatever he likes to do with the whole footage. And Martin, thanks a lot again. And
thank you.
We'll continue this for the third webinar in some time in the future. And thanks for our viewers. Danke fürs Vorbeischauen und auf bald. And I stop the recording.